Hey there, everyone. I know it's been a while since I've last posted another review, and I figured why not start off with one of the best trilogies, in my opinion, in what is now Star Wars Legends. But to me, it's still a classic trilogy that I love to read again and again. Today, folks, we're going to talk about the Thrawn Trilogy, Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. So to start off with, I've read these books a bunch of times before, and to me, it still holds up as a very good story. And in my personal opinion, I feel like this would have actually made a far better sequel trilogy than what Disney has given us. For instance, this takes place a few years after the Battle of Endor, all the events of Episode 6. So in my opinion, this would have actually worked for the sequel trilogy. Because on the one hand, it gives us Luke, Han, and Leia still in their prime. It gives us one of the best genius level characters in Star Wars. And it also gives us a powerful Force user who is not Palpatine. So yeah, that's my little opinion on that. This, in my opinion, would have made a far better sequel trilogy. But let's talk about it. So the Thrawn Trilogy introduces us to the title character here, Grand Admiral Thrawn. And when I first read these books, I did not know what to think of Thrawn at first, but after reading them, I feel like he's one of the best tactical level characters in this whole universe. I mean, the fact that he's not a Force user by any means, and yet he's able to outwit most Force users, as well as being able to outwit many of the rebellion's leaders, is absolutely awesome. He doesn't need overwhelming Force powers or anything like that. He's just that good of a commander. But now let's talk about this. So this takes place a few years after the Battle of Endor, where the Empire has now been pushed to the brink. They have barely any controlled space to themselves, and they are slowly losing it bit by bit to the New Republic. But then Grand Admiral Thrawn shows up, and he decides to take control of the fleet and help them to recover from their devastating losses. And the way he does this is absolutely brilliant. He focuses on getting into the psychology of many of the alien species that he faces through their artwork. And just looking at them, he's able to actually identify what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, how they will behave, how they will respond to certain instances, which in my opinion is brilliant. But now let's really get to other factors here. This introduces us to so many other planets and so many other characters. For instance, Jurus C'baoth, a insane clone of a former past Jedi Master named Jurus C'baoth. Jurus C'baoth is a more terrifying version of the Emperor, to me, at least. Because for one, he dives into the dark side regularly. He primarily uses Force Lightning, and he is able to do so many other things. But the fact that he is a half-mad clone makes him even more terrifying because he's unpredictable. And in my personal opinion, the fact that this man managed to take control of the minds of so many people to the point where he actually replaces a large chunk of their brains. It's pointed out in the third book, The Last Command, how at one point one of the Imperial generals that he's working with, after he is disconnected from C'baoth, he dies the next day because most of his brain has primarily shut down. And to me, that is horrifying. And in my opinion, that makes him a bit scarier than the Emperor. But now, other positives of this series. We are introduced to Jason and Jaina Solo, who will go on to introduce Legends for many, many years as main characters. We have Luke struggling to learn how to be a teacher now, since he is now, as Ben Kenobi points out, Not the last of the old Jedi, but the first of the new. And we see him with his fears of how he will be able to teach others, how he will be able to pass on the knowledge that he has learned from Yoda and Obi-Wan about the Jedi Order. And I think that's actually fascinating to see his character like that. That moment of vulnerability. The moment of questioning, will I be able to teach them as well as they taught me? And more importantly, how will I be able to raise up this new order of Jedi Knights? Which I thought was a fascinating character moment for Luke. That moment of self-doubt. That moment of coming to terms with he'll teach them the best he can. Now moving on. So some other fascinating moments that we get here is that we're introduced to another character who, in my opinion, would have actually made a really good impression in the new Disney-controlled Star Wars. Mara Jade. Mara Jade is actually a former Emperor's Hand. Now, for those of you who don't know what they are, Emperor's Hands are kind of a group of hand-picked assassins. They are trained by Palpatine, in some cases, for the dark side of the Force, as well as many different forms of assassination. They work in the shadows to hunt down any of the Emperor's personal enemies, whether they be Jedi, Imperial traitors, or any others who might threaten his empire. And we actually see a possibility of what Mara Jade would have done if she had been able to be at Jabba's palace. We actually find out that she was there to assassinate Luke, under orders of the Emperor. And we find out a possible future of where if she had been on Jabba's sail barge, she would have actually caught the lightsaber that Luke would have had tossed him by R2-D2, and it would have wound up to Luke's death. Which I thought was really interesting. But to see her personal character growth throughout this trilogy was also fascinating to behold. She goes from being completely obsessed with her mission, her last command by the Emperor to kill Luke Skywalker, and how she learns to accept that she does not have to follow the Emperor's orders, that she can learn how to be her own person. Now let's see here. So the reason why I say this would have made a better sequel trilogy is because we had a cohesive story throughout, first of all. You have Grand Admiral Thrawn planning out how to gain back some of the lands that the Empire has lost against the New Republic, and he actually nearly succeeds as well. We see how he becomes a massive threat over the course of 3 books to the New Republic, and how it is rapidly starting to crumble. We see struggles, we see character development, we see the relationships between Luke and Mara Jade, as well as Han and Leia. And we see how they are all trying to progress past the movies, which I thought was interesting. But anyways, I'm probably not making any sense here, but to put it simply, my personal favorite would probably be The Last Command. While it is the conclusion to the whole trilogy at the same time, it offers such an amazing final battle between Luke, Han, and Leia, and Mara Jade against Jurus C'baoth. And we see some of the power that Jurus C'baoth has. Like at one point, we see the effects that he has on some of these people and how most of their brains are practically dead as he forces his influence on them. And at another moment, we see how powerful he is with the Force Lightning, which that is one of his most dominant weapons throughout this whole trilogy. But the most terrifying moment has to be what is called the Force Scream, where he projects a massive blast of Force energy with just the power of his voice alone. And to put it simply, it was terrifying. I actually felt terrified for Luke, Han, and Leia, and wondering how they are going to survive against an opponent like this. Because he's a little more crazy than the Emperor. He will not play with you, when in fact he will destroy you without hesitation if you do not fit into his plans. Yeah, and I'm probably fanboying a little bit over Drew Sabayoth, but he was such a fascinating character. In my personal opinion, him and Thrawn would have made far better villains for Disney's sequel trilogy than what we got. But to put it simply, this trilogy is by far still one of the best, with multiple things that any classic Star Wars fan would love. Massive space battles. There's not as much lightsaber combat simply because there's not much lightsaber wielders as there is later on in Legends. But I think in some cases that's actually for the best, because we do get some lightsaber action, but it's more or less how the last surviving Force wielders are able to adapt to this new world where it's mostly predominantly blasters and those who might have Force power. But another fascinating facet that I found of this trilogy was the introduction of creatures who use the Force or can even negate it. The Salamari, for instance, they have this ability to create a literal bubble where there is no Force abilities. There is no Force energy, there is nothing. They have the ability to push back the Force. And in my opinion, that's actually horrifying, because if you are up against a Jedi, if you have that surrounding you, you are basically untouchable from Force powers. You cannot be touched by Force lightning, or Force choke, or even Force push. You cannot be affected by it. And if a Jedi is trapped in a large area with Ysalamari, they're powerless. They only have their basic human stamina without the Force backing them up. And in the end, they could easily tire out and eventually be killed because of that. But now, another fascinating creature was the Vornskurs, a native species to one of the planets that is introduced in this trilogy called Merkur, a home planet of the Salamari and the Vornskurs. The Vornskurs apparently use the Force to track their prey, I want to say. Yeah, to track their prey. And to me, that's actually pretty interesting. Because in Heir to the Empire, we are introduced to Luke having no power to the Force because he's constantly surrounded by Ysalamari and he's being hunted by these Vornskurs while trapped with an opponent, with a woman who wants to kill him in revenge for the death of her master. And it was actually rather fascinating to see Luke and Mara Jade learning how to work with each other over the course of their survival in the forests of Merkur in Heir to the Empire. That was a really fascinating story to read, because we see Luke without his power, learning how to just use his basic human stamina and basic human abilities to overcome the trials in this forest. Dark Force Rising really had a lot of build-up to where we see the Empire and the New Republic trying to grab at this new hidden prize, which is a force of hundreds of empty ships, which would have pretty much landed them anyone numerical superiority. And the way Thrawn actually does this, the way he actually gains so much ability, is by using the Emperor's storehouse, which was a massive cache of hidden weapons and technologies that were kept secret from the Empire and locked away for further use, which included a cloning facility. So Thrawn not only managed to gain massive manpower for the Empire, but also massive ships. So in the time that he managed to take control of the Imperial Remnant, he managed to make them a capable fighting force once again. He managed to make them a major threat to the New Republic. And if Thrawn had not perished at the end of this trilogy, I feel like he would have actually won, which makes him all the more of a fascinating character to me. But yeah, once again, I definitely recommend this trilogy if you want a very good story, if you're wanting just a good read, or if you have no idea who Grand Admiral Thrawn is or if you know nothing about this story. I might have only brushed the basics of it, but I hope this actually makes some of you more interested in checking out these books and offering some more support to Legends. But anyways, I hope you all have a good day. Thank you again for listening.